Well, anyone here have an unfinished to-do list? You know, something waiting to be completed. Anybody? Nobody? Come on. I mean, it kind of goes with the territory, right? And it's easy to get sidetracked from that to-do list, isn't it? It's hard to finish when you have so many distractions from, the media, people around you, thoughts in your head, and just other things that you're supposed to be doing. And we get distracted also in pursuing God's calling. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. There was a missionary in Asia, and he was working as a linguist and was very effective and good. And this linguist was so good that he got the attention of an Asian company who needed somebody who was skilled like him. And so they made him a very generous salary offering and said, come, here's this great job. And it was a good job. But the linguist said, no, I have been called by God to do a translation of the Bible in this dialect that's in Asia. And so I can't leave that. And so he thought the matter was over, and so not long after that, the company approached him again, and they made an even more generous offering of salary and this and that. And he said, no, I can't. I'm going to do this. And so, okay, that must be the end of it. But of course it wasn't. They came back and doubled their salary offering and just said, okay, look, just tell us whatever it'll take. And so he answered the company and he said, it's not that your salary's too small. It's that your job is too small. That's where Nehemiah was. And just saying, what am I called to do? That's where we are. What is your purpose and calling? This missionary had a purpose and a calling that wasn't about making a bunch of money. Not that making a bunch of money is wrong, but that wasn't his central purpose and calling. So what's yours? We're going to look at how Nehemiah's purpose and calling will be tested in the next phase of the people coming after him. So Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 1, when word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, our cast of villains that are in this story that from previous chapters, and they're not going to go away. They're still coming with more. And the rest of our enemies, that I had rebuilt the wall, and not a gap was left in it, though up to that time I had not set the doors in the gates. So they sent me this message, come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me. So I sent messengers to them with this reply, I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. 4 times they sent me the same message. Now, you read that, doesn't Sanballat and friends, that appeal, doesn't it sound reasonable? Doesn't it sound like, hey, come on, just come, we'll work it out. Don't you want to have good relationships with your neighbors and the people around you? Can't we talk it out? And it sounds so reasonable, it just seems so tempting. Let's reach a mutual understanding and resolve our differences. Now, what's this plain of Ono? No, this is not where Oko, distant relatives, were born. This was a plain 30... How many of you got that Beatles reference? Come on. And how many of you didn't laugh because, you were embarrassed that you listened to the Beatles and wallowed down? Or it was just a really poor joke. It was one of those two, right? Anyway, the plain of Ono was up kind of near modern-day Tel Aviv, so it would be about 30 miles northwest of Jerusalem. Now, imagine, Nehemiah has been threatened by these people. They're trying to pick off workers on the wall. And so they're saying, leave the safety of your protection of Jerusalem and the soldiers and people around him, or at least people who carried swords, and travel what would take, a couple of days, 30 miles, maybe on a horse you could do it, or a donkey. But it's going to expose Nehemiah, isn't it? It's going to leave him vulnerable to an ambush, vulnerable to being kidnapped or killed. And Plus, it's also going to distract him away from the wall being finished and being done. So he smells out that this is not really a wise thing to do. And so he gives them an answer. And he says to them, I'm focused on what God has called me to do. See, he knows his priorities. It isn't just a safety issue. It's let's get God's will done. And so he doesn't want to give up the thing he's called to do, to build this wall so God's people will be safe to worship, to do a lesser thing with people, and we'll look at this and more in a minute. They have no intention of working this out. This is all a ruse, and it says that in the text. And so we can find out also by the fact that, they sent this message like 4 times. You get sort of a feeling of desperation. They just, come on. They're pressuring him. They're hoping they can wear him down. And so you can see that if this was just something, well, I just want to float this idea. Nope, they were intent on doing something because they were relentless. Because Satan is relentless to destroy God's work. So just because the devil approaches you once with a temptation and you resist it and say, oh, good, I'm glad that's over. Boy, if only. He keeps coming. Same temptation, a different temptation. Satan will do whatever he can to distract you from doing what God has called you to do. Satan doesn't want you to be effective and trusting in God and having your priorities in line. And so he distracts you and tempts you and wears you down. And that's where your spiritual practices. We talked in communion about abiding or being with God in relationship and remembering that we're flawed, imperfect creatures. And so your spiritual disciplines, the time you spend with God, yes, reading scripture, but also praying and listening. And, well, we'll talk in a moment about some solitude. We need all of these things to help us look at life and say, what am I facing? What, like in the coming next few days of this holiday, what things are you thinking a lot about? What things are on your mind that might distract you? Or maybe you're just exhausted and tired. You're looking forward to having a few days off from doing things. And so what do you need to think about and focus on? So, our first point of the 3 in your outline in your bulletin, we get distracted by diverting activities. Diverting activities. And I'm not meaning, wrong things. Go take the 4th of July holiday and drink too much or eat too much or whatever it might be, but maybe they might be neutral things. But we get distracted from what's important. We get distracted by diverting activities. Now, how many of you know Gordon Ramsay, the kitchen nightmare kind of thing? These are real, abrupt would be a nice way to put what he does on the show. But so in this episode, Gordon Ramsay, at least in this little segment, is going to restaurants that are in great locations. And they are like really attractive kinds of places, and they have the building facade and the table and the ambiance and all of that stuff. It looks really nice inside, but the only thing is they have horrible food. But all the other stuff's great service and all this. So he goes and he orders several stuff off the menu, and then in his trademark blunt style tells them in fine detail how horrible their food is. You see, the managers are so busy, trying to manage the kitchen, get the order out, get the waiters to take it, be polite, and greet the customers. And they're looking at all the logistics, and they forget the most important thing. They forget the whole reason they're there is to serve you delicious food. And so, what a great illustration of what we can do in our life, and the church gets so busy doing all these things that we forget, what are we really here for? What is our main purpose as a person? Do you know your reason for being here? If you were to stop and think why has God left you here? Why? How come when you made your decision to put your faith in God and in Jesus Christ, trust in what he's done, he didn't just say, great, now, all of you are Enochs, we're going to swoop you up to heaven like Enoch did. And so he doesn't. He left you here. Why? Why does God have you here? And we can get as a church so focused on our programs or our styles, the way we do things, our methods, this is how we do it, and we don't do it any other way. And we got to protect that way. We have to have those things and these styles, and we lose the main thing, which was to come as we worship God. He says, go and make disciples. We're here to make disciples. And I've been still reading a lot about that. We did some sermons in April about it. But we have a lot of people in churches that are converts, but they haven't really become followers. So I made my decision when I was little. And it's all good till then, till I see God in heaven. I'm just kind of waiting, and I'll just live my life. But, the New Testament says, make disciples, followers of Jesus that are constantly growing closer to him and having an impact on the world. So distractions can come disguised as neutral options. Busyness can distract us. You can go on Facebook and say, I wonder what flavor coffee my friend had this morning at Starbucks. Or, ooh, gosh, here's a cute picture of my dog. And look at this funny thing that my dog is doing. These are not wrong things. These are not that's morally wrong. If you're a cat lover, you hate dogs, right? Or vice versa. But, people spend all this time surfing, and I long ago never hardly read stuff on Facebook because it would just be pages and pages of people talking about these things that we normally never told each other about. But, pumpkin spice latte will be out in only 2 months, right? So let me show you a picture of my pumpkin spice latte with the little heart thing in there, or maybe a pumpkin picture. And so we're so intent. And again, I'm not telling you can't look at Facebook. I'll walk over to the side. I'm not telling you can't look at Instagram, because Facebook, Instagram over here, there's some, but, because the millennial generation is not looking at Facebook anymore, by the way. But, social media can take up so much of your time. And it can also, you read this stuff, and sometimes, Twitter especially gets so angry and vindictive and cancel this and you're that and such, that you wonder, why is it so hard to focus on God? Because our head gets pumped full of news media, cable news channels, social media feeds, your friends who are outraged about things, and it gets you all stirred up and you stop focusing on God. Now, we need to get involved in these things. This is not to say you shouldn't care about some things. If your Facebook or your Instagram or your social media is saying, like this, for me, this petition is a moral issue, right? Isn't transgender, it's not just politics. For us, there's a sexuality thing which cuts into where the Bible overlaps. So it's okay to vote. It's okay to sign a petition. It's okay to spend some time getting a petition ready, but it isn't your main identity, is it? Your main identity is following Jesus, and this is just one of the ways that you might choose to do that on an issue that's clearly a moral thing. So we get diverted, though, so easily that we don't carve out that sacred space. There's not room. Now, imagine, and I think it's easy here, it's harder in Eastern Washington to imagine this thing called dew, because it's so dry. But dew forms because two things happen. The temperature drops and the wind calms and gets more still. And when that happens, the plants can open up their pores and they can receive the moisture that's in the air from the humidity that forms the dew. Now, I want you to imagine your soul is like a leaf at night. And you need that calm time out of the heat of life and the pressure of life for your pores to open and receive the dew, spiritual dew that God has for you. And we get so busy, that gets crowded out, doesn't it? And then we wonder why we're having a hard time focusing on the joy of the Lord, or how come we're feeling despondent about the state of our world. And there's a lot to be despondent about. But we need that time with God. We need to let our hearts not be so busy that we can't pause and spend significant time to let God speak into our hearts and let his due come. And then we can evaluate life's issues from a calmer framework. So, we get distracted by diverting activities. Nehemiah 6:5 says this, "Then the fifth time, Sanballat sent his aide to me with an unsealed letter in which was written, 'It is reported among the nations,' and Geshem says it's true, 'that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king, and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah.' Now this report will get back to the king, to the emperor. So come, let us meet together." Now, Sanballat's turning up the pressure. You notice the little details. He's recycling that old accusation of rebellion which shut down the wall building 15 or so years before. And so he brings it back, but now he's infusing nice, contemporary, fresh details into it to make it sound plausible and believable. You're going to declare yourself king. You have prophets that are going to claim. And you know what? Everyone's talking about it, so it must be true. Right? There's smoke, there must be a fire. And so they're trying to make this whole thing where the people begin to doubt what's really going on. And then he adds, of course, remember, Geshem was probably one of the leading people that had all the Arab tribes around him that he oversaw and influenced. So he's considered a reliable leader. And Geshem, this reliable guy, the Jewish nobles and leaders, they all have great respect for him. We're going to read about that in a few more chapters. Geshem says it's true. It must be true, right? Well, what do we do with that? He says it's actually really in your best interest to meet. Now, what's this unsealed letter? Is that any big deal? So the Persian custom, and probably many other places, that you had a important correspondence that you put it in like what we would call a sealed diplomatic pouch today. And that they didn't get open. Nobody could look. The courier can't go like, "Ooh, I wonder what this is." Hold it up to the light, steam the envelope open. They couldn't do that. It's in a diplomatic pouch with a Persian seal on it. But that's not what they did. Sanballat sent it as a unsealed letter, which means he wants the people to read it that are delivering it and spread rumors. He's doing this to create more dissent and more resistance and all of that by sending this unsealed letter, not following the diplomatic protocol. And so he also, in doing that, is expressing contempt for Nehemiah as Sanballat's inferior. So the strategy is to get doubts, to get the people to doubt Nehemiah. They'll think, no wonder Nehemiah was pushing so hard on that wall. He's got a personal agenda going here. I don't think I trust him anymore. I'm going back to my farm. So it all makes sense. That's what Sanballat is trying to accomplish. Chapter 6, verse 8. I sent him this reply. Nothing like what you are saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head. They were trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. And so Nehemiah's response, but I prayed, now strengthen my hands. So Nehemiah, he directly denies and rebuts Sanballat, but what he doesn't do is get into a big drawn-out argument and debate. No, let me show you that. Oh, wait a minute. How dare you say that? He just says, nope, you're making it up. It's all in your head. And most importantly, he didn't just sit there and wring his hands. He prayed. He went to God and said, God, this is your project. I know you can handle it. His strategy was to refer the matter to God. Is that ours? When you get stressed and worried or angry, do you go to God and say, God, help me with this? Take care of it. Now, also, Nehemiah is building on his reputation. So he has a reputation of integrity that he knows that these people know him, and they know that he doesn't have false motives. And so the soil in which Sanballat's trying to plant seeds of doubt isn't a very good soil. It's rocky. They're not going to believe it because they know Nehemiah. His life has been blameless. And our life can be blameless, and that's one of our best defenses. So the second point is we get distracted by unfair accusations. Get distracted by diverting activities that get us too busy and take our mind away from the things that matter. But we also get distracted by unfair accusations. So how do you respond to those? When somebody talks about you at work behind your back, or someone accuses you of things, do you just and this would be my thing, I'd lay in bed and I ruminate. I just spin it in my head and it just goes until all hours of the night. Or I wake up and I start thinking about it and I can't get back to sleep because I'm playing out the scenario. How could they do this to me? How can I defend myself? I'm gonna plan my defense right here in the middle of the night when I can't sleep. And so I just ruminate and spin it. And I get distracted from God's purposes. How about you? Has that ever happened to you? Now notice Nehemiah is not pulled into a broader cultural war like some Christians now spend so much time raging against the other side. They're just undone by all of the awful stuff happening. And yes, there is awful stuff happening. Our society is definitely, things have deteriorated in the decades that I can remember since the 60s. But we can't get so spun up that we lose our focus on who God is. And so Nehemiah didn't do that. We have to focus on who we are, not on what is wrong with everything out there. Sometimes we do that, but not at the expense of who we are in God and Jesus. So what's your purpose? Who are you? What's your identity? What's our church's identity? What are we called? If we're supposed to make disciples, we come and we worship God and get equipped and trained and motivated to make disciples. How are we going to do that? What is this church's calling that we know what God wants? So, do accusations or trying to attack back distract you from what God wants? Do you let a spirit of fear, because I think that's a big thing we've been seeing over the decades, is that we're getting more and more afraid as we see things getting worse and worse. But that is, that's when God rises up and shines the brightest, right? The darker the dark, the brighter the light. So, Satan's strategy is to distract you with that fear, so you operate out of fear and reactiveness to your individual circumstance or the global circumstances. But do we trust that God is sustaining us even when things around us aren't going well? Because look, Nehemiah is under a lot of pressure here. They're threatening him, and pretty soon you're going to say, well, they're going to kill him. So he had to know, even walking the streets of Jerusalem, that his life was at risk. In fact, we're going to, in the next point, amp it up even more with that risk. But he didn't let it distract him. It didn't it didn't define who he was in his identity. Do we trust God that he has his hand on us, on our church, for our next steps, and even in our world? So we are distracted by unfair accusations. A third strategy to distract is in verse 10 of Nehemiah 6. I went to the house of Shemaiah, who was shut in at his home, and he said, let us meet in the house of God inside the temple, and let us close the temple doors, because men are coming to kill you. By night they are coming to kill you. But I said, should a man like me run away? Or should someone like me go into the temple to save his life? I will not go. I realized that God had not sent him, but he had prophesied against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He had been hired to intimidate me so that I would commit a sin by doing this. And the sin is the going into the temple. Then that would give me a bad name to discredit me. So Shemaiah was the son of a priest, and evidently this guy is a good friend of Nehemiah's. So shut in his house kind of doesn't have this aura of danger. You kind of feel like this is one of those spy shows on TV, and there's drama. But Shemaiah gives this false word to try to lure him in. Come, hide out in the holy place. Is that any big deal? Well, Numbers says only the priest is allowed in the holy place. So what Shemaiah the priest is trying to get him to do is come where I can come, where you're not allowed to come, where it's illegal according to the law of God for you to be in the holy place because you're not a priest. And then the people can say, "Good, look at Nehemiah. Look at him trying to save his skin." So now Nehemiah knows this word about the killing can't be from God because Shemaiah is lying to tell Nehemiah to do something God would never tell him to do. You ever have someone say, I'm going to do this thing, and maybe it's not the best way to do it, but, it's got a good purpose for it. For many times of listening to people, I'm going to marry a non-Christian. I am going to and they start telling me this, God's okay because this is going to be for his glory because I'm going to help bring them to the Lord. I mean, I heard it so many times, but in other ways, we should do this thing, and it's not being done in a way that honors God, but it's got the good, holy, righteous end. Isn't it okay then? Or was that guy, what was his name, Machiavelli, that said the end does not justify the means? We've got a lot of bad means, ways that we're trying to accomplish things in our world, in our society, because they think it's the right end. We can't get pulled into that, neither did Nehemiah, because he knew that if he ignored the law, it would look like he was cowardly. It would look like he is willing to save his own skin, and his leadership would be compromised. That he was all talk on the outside and fear on the inside. And so Nehemiah was unwilling to do this. Nehemiah said, I'm not the kind of leader who's going to hide in a temple to save my own skin. Either God protects me or he doesn't. Shades of Esther. If I perish, I perish. But I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to do it in the right way. The right thing done the right way. And it doesn't guarantee you that you won't suffer from it. But you're doing what God's called you to do. Nehemiah, he handled this distraction, this threat, because his life was anchored in the foundation and priorities of his relationship with God. So verse 14, as if that weren't enough, remember Tobiah and Sanballat, my God, because of what they have done. Remember also the prophet Noadiah and how she, yes, there was a female prophet in the Old Testament, and the rest of the prophets have been trying to intimidate me. Now, the disturbing thing on that shouldn't be that there's a female prophet. The disturbing thing should be, why are all of these prophets who are listening to God trying to intimidate Nehemiah? What in the world is going on in this dynamic? I think it just boils down to this. They are all resisting God because their loyalties are rooted in this social structure that Sanballat and others have going. And so it's like trying to swim against the tide of society. Jesus did that a lot, didn't he, with the Pharisees, who were the most popular, and then the Sadducees, who were in league with the Romans. And so he was against all of them, enough that the Herodians, who were of the party of Herod, got together. All three of these groups that all hate each other got together to oppose Jesus. And he wasn't saying, oh gosh, I'm making waves. No, I'm doing what God's called me to do. And so these people, though, are swept into the current of what was politically expedient. I'm sure they had lots of ways of trying to justify it. Their friends would tell them, no, this is good. Nehemiah, he should be meeting with them. He shouldn't be pushing us so hard, or whatever their conversations were. They were pressuring him to meet with this. Maybe, they're intimidated and they've caved into that. And we're going to find, like I said, there's a bunch of shenanigans that goes on in the social order of things that Nehemiah will have to also address. This is a little hint. So number 3, we are distracted by unwise connections. Sometimes our echo chambers, our friends, our social media, the news channels we listen to, we just hear the same thing over and over, and we don't even know what another viewpoint might be on something. And so we can't let those outlets of news or opinions of friends push us away from God's opinion. We should get what we think from Scripture. We are distracted by unwise connections. So again, some of these they're not wrong to have friends. It's not wrong to have social media accounts. It's not wrong to listen to cable news. But we can't let those determine who we are and how we respond. So when someone's saying we have to cancel all these people, we have to reject them and treat them, like dirt beneath our feet, that's a fear-based response. It isn't the fruit of the Spirit, is it? There's so much ways things are being done today that are not being done in the fruit of the Spirit. Let me close. 5-year-old Joshua wanted to learn to climb a tree. Just imagine. I know it's hard for Ellie and Mark to imagine this, your kid wanting to climb a tree. I loved climbing trees. I'd get stuck in them, and the neighbors would have to bring ladders to get me out. But Dad lifted him onto the lowest branch of the tree because he was a good dad, and coached him, now go climb slowly to the center of the tree. But Joshua could only look down and cry, I'm going to fall. Dad got Joshua's attention, said, don't think about falling, think about climbing. Joshua thought about that for a moment and then very hesitantly stood and climbed to the center of the tree. The next week, Joshua wanted to climb the same tree, and Dad lifted him onto that same lowest branch, and this time Joshua said, I will think about climbing. He climbed confidently, went to the middle of the tree. His fears didn't distract him because he reached upward. Again, a story, a metaphor for how do we look down at all the problems in our life, all the problems in our society, and let that make us afraid, or do we look up at God to say, I'm going to climb toward the Spirit and reach upward to heaven? Now just consider this. Grays Harbor County is, by the reckoning I found on the internet, the 3rd poorest county in Washington. Did you know that? I didn't know that. Ken said it was the 2nd, but 2nd, 3rd, it's not good. Also, did you know that a far majority of the kids in Elma schools are in low income? Which is like, there's poverty line, and I had to look it up, Greg. Low income means it's within 200% of poverty line. So their low income means all the school all over Elma are on free lunches. So what this means to me when we have, almost, I think Greg told me at Ella Elementary, how do I get that all spun up? Elma Elementary is 72% of the kids are at this low income threshold or below. Isn't that a great opportunity for us? And that's what we've been doing with our coach from the district office, is helping us say, who is our community, who are we, and what is God calling us to take our strengths and align them with the needs of the community. The needs are great. So we have to ask ourselves, is this church, is this for us? Is this mainly for us? And we kind of need to get programs and things that help us be us. Or is there an additional thing besides it being us getting encouraged and fed or whatever? We also are equipped to go out and do something out there. So it isn't like my focus is on, nope, that's not for me. That I don't like that. I don't want to go out. I don't want to bring those kind of people in. They'll make our church different. There's a lot of people that have I come to church because church is for us. We want things like they were before, what we're used to. But God has something in mind for our next steps that's different. So what is he calling us to do and be to reach those around us who need Jesus? Remember your 5 people? Are you still praying for them in your circle of influence? Praying for God to open up your eyes to see what needs you could meet in them? I don't want us to forget that. That's kind of what it's living out the kingdom life and looking for people to minister to. So what keeps us looking down and distracted instead of focusing on climbing to the center of God's will? Let's pray.